Hey there, this is Steve at DabbleLab, and in this video we're going to walk through setting up a Pocket validator node. I am going to be following the steps that are outlined on the official Pocket documentation site, which you can find at docs.pokt.network. And when you get there, if you search 0 to node, the site might get updated, the URLs might change, but search 0 to node and you'll find the documentation that I'm walking through. I'm working on a Mac and I've got my desktop set up with a split screen. On the right hand side, I'll be entering all of the terminal commands that we'll need to be entering as we go through the tutorial. And on the left hand side, I'll be stepping through the tutorial and some other links out to different resources that we'll need. You can set this up on just about any cloud provider out there, but I'm going to be using Linode for this tutorial, and so we'll start by setting up a Linode virtual private server, and then we'll move on from there and walk through the Pocket software installation, and then part 3 we'll get into the Pocket software configuration, and then in part 4 we'll set up an Nginx proxy to proxy requests to the Pocket service, and then finally we'll talk about going live. I'm going to be walking through setting up Pocket as a relay to the Pocket network. The core utility of a Pocket node is that it relays transactions to other blockchains. It can relay to a lot of different blockchains right now: Harmony, Polygon, Ethereum, and many, many others. We won't be going through setting up the node to relay to other blockchains in this tutorial. It's out of scope, but we'll be walking through setting it up to relay to the Pocket network. And if you're interested in staking your node, which we'll talk about later, you don't have to do that to go through this tutorial. But if you're interested in staking your node for rewards, you can earn rewards if you're relaying to Pocket. So that's a good starting point. All right, prerequisites. You'll need a few things. You'll need a server. Like I said, we'll be using Linode for this tutorial, but you could choose any virtual private server hosting company that you want. You'll need a domain name, and you'll need the ability to add DNS records to that domain name. And then if you decide that you want to stake your node for rewards, you'll need a minimum of 15,000 Pocket, but the recommended is 15,100. So you will need that, and this entire process takes about 2 to 4 hours, depending on how long it takes to download the blockchain data, the snapshot, and that's the biggest part. The steps without that download, probably 30 minutes. If you're doing it the very first time, maybe an hour, just to understand the steps. But the biggest chunk of time is just the download process and getting the node to catch up to the current height on the mainnet, the blockchain itself. Okay, with that, let's get into it. We're going to start by creating a virtual private server on Linode, and we're going to be using Ubuntu 20.04 LTS, this one right here. LTS is long-term support. There's newer versions, but this one provides long-term support, which is why we're selecting that one. The region, you could choose any region. I'm going to use Atlanta because I know that supports NVMe storage. I think most of the other regions probably do now as well for Linode, but NVMe storage is preferred because it's really fast, especially for doing like nodes and blockchain kind of stuff. It's definitely preferable. The instance, we're just setting up Pocket to run on this instance, so we can use a small-ish instance. I'm going to choose this dedicated 16 gigs with 8 CPUs, dedicated CPU cores. This also has 320 gigs of storage, and it's, like I said, NVMe storage, which is enough for everything that we're going to be doing for right now. But the blockchain grows pretty quickly. I think at the time of recording, it's over 200 gigs. And so you do want to consider that and find out what the current blockchain size is, the Pocket blockchain size is when you're doing this. If you do this later, you might very likely need more storage than I'm using right here. All right, continuing on, the label, this is just what it's going to be named. I'm going to be using the name pokt001.pokt.run, and this is a domain that I've registered for this tutorial. You'll need your own domain name, and you could name your node or the label whatever you want. Passwords and SSH key here. I typically use an SSH key because it's more secure. For this tutorial, I'm going to go through using a password, but my recommendation would be to use an SSH key, and I'll leave a link in the tutorial notes on a walkthrough for using that if that's new to you. If you are using a password, this is going to be the password for the root user, which is the highest level user in a Linux system. So you want to use a really strong password. I use, for example, like a sentence that I can remember that's easy, and I'll replace some of the letters with numbers and things like that. But you want this to be something long and easy for you to remember, but very hard for anybody else to guess. Longer is better. So I will type in my password now. And then come down here. I'll also use my SSH key. And we don't need a backup for this. For the tutorial, we're not going to use a private IP address. So everything we need is good to go here. So now the Linode instance is being provisioned, and I'm going to, while that's happening, go set up my DNS. And so I need this IP address. I'm using Cloudflare for DNS. And I'm going to be using this record here. All right, now we just need to wait for this to boot up, and we should be ready to go. Okay, this seems to be booted now. We'll head back to the documentation here, and we'll move on to part one, which is setting up the server. I've gone through these first steps here. Now we have our Linode instance. And again, this could be any cloud provider. You probably want a minimum of 16 gigs of memory and 8 CPU cores, and at least 320 gigs of storage. More would be better, or you'll need to add additional storage. Configuring DNS, we just did this on Cloudflare. You will use whatever DNS provider you're using to configure a DNS record that points to the IP address for your virtual private server. So we're all good here, and that's an A record, by the way. So you'll use whatever name you want, but an A record and then the IP address of your server. To make sure that the DNS is all configured, we'll ping the DNS record just to make sure we're getting a response back. So we are, and that IP address should match our Linode IP address, which it does. And so we're good to move on and log in with our root account using SSH. Say yes. Log in. And now I am all logged into to my Linode instance, and we can continue on to the next step, which is to set the host name. And the host name we're going to set to the full DNS name that we use. So the name of the host along with the domain name, and we'll do that using Nano, or you could use Vim or VI or whatever you're most comfortable with. And then we're going to change the default, which on Linode is localhost. Might be different if you're using a different hosting provider, but we're going to change this to the full DNS name. So in my case, it's pokt001.pokt.run, the domain name. And then we'll save that. And for this to take effect, we need to reboot. So we'll reboot with reboot. And we'll let that reboot, and then we'll log back in again and move on to creating a user. All right, now we're ready. Okay, now that we're logged back in, if I check the host name with the hostname command, I can see that it's changed to my full DNS name, which is what we want. Okay, from here we can move on and create a user, and we're doing this because it's generally more secure to not use the root user. So we're going to be creating a new user. The name that we'll be using is Pokt for the user that we're going to create. You could use another name if you want. You would just need to remember that as we walk through the steps here, because we'll be using Pokt as the username as we go through here. In these, we're adding the Pokt user to the sudo group, and we're also creating a home directory for the user. And so we're doing that, and then we're going to add a password for the user for right now. And again, this is just for going through the steps in the tutorial. Still would recommend using an SSH key here. All right, and now that we've got our user created, we'll switch to that user. And here we are. We're logged in now as the Pokt user. And so we'll continue on to the next part and the next step, which is the software installation. Okay, before we install any new packages, we're going to update the existing system packages, and we'll do that with the sudo apt update to get the latest version of the packages. Okay, now that the system packages are updated, we're going to install a few dependencies. Some of these might already be installed depending on the image that you're using, and the different cloud providers will provide some of these in their base images. But I would go through and try to install all of these dependencies. Some of them, again, might already be installed, like Git is in this case, and Build Tools I don't think is in Linode's case. No, but I'm pretty sure that curl and file are both going to be already installed. But again, it just depends on the image that you're using. So I would go through these steps anyhow. Even if it is installed, you can just continue on to the next one. So Build Tools is installing. Now we'll try curl. That's installed already. And file is, I believe, also installed. It is. Nginx is not. And this is an HTTP daemon server that we're going to use to proxy to the Pokt service. And certbot is a utility for registering SSL certificates with Let's Encrypt and configuring them as well. And there's also a plugin for certbot that makes it a little bit easier to configure when you're configure the certificates when you're using Nginx. So we're going to go ahead and install that as well. And then JQ, this package we're going to use to make updates to some of the JSON configuration files in Pokt. So JQ is a utility for working with JSON, JavaScript object notation files, which the Pokt software uses for config files. All right, and then another important dependency is to install Go or Golang. Golang is a programming language, and it's the language that Pokt, the Pokt software uses. So we're going to need that to compile our Pokt software. So this first step is just to make sure you're in the user's home directory, which we are in this case, but I'll go ahead and do that. And then we're going to get the Golang archive. You want to also check here at golang.org/dl for download to make sure you're downloading the latest version. And in this case, 17.7 is the one we're downloading. So we'll go ahead and download that archive, and then we'll extract the archive after it's done downloading with this next step here. And then this next step is probably not necessary, but we're going to do it. This is just to make sure that the Pokt user has ownership of all of the Go files. And now these next three steps here, we're adding environment variables or path variables to the user's profile so that they'll be available as environment variables, so that we can use the go command through these steps. And then this step 7 here, we're sourcing or basically reloading the profile to get the environment variables loaded, and that just prevents us from having to log out and log back in or restart. And then this last step here is just confirming that Go is installed. And if you type Go version at the command line, you should see the version that was installed returned, just like that. And if so, we are good to continue on to the next step, which is installing the Pokt software. And what we're going to be doing here, first we're going to make a directory in the Go src github.com directory. And this is a convention that Go projects use. So we'll create that directory first, and then we'll move into that directory. And then we're going to download check out, clone rather, the Pokt software from GitHub. And then once we have cloned that, we're going to switch into the repository itself, into Pokt-core. And then we're going to be checking out the current version, in this case, release candidate 0.8.2. The note up here, check the tags, this here, I'll show you. Actually, I've already got a tab open. Check the tags, the Pokt tags, to make sure that you're using or checking out the latest release. And you want to probably to make sure that it's a release candidate or a full version. The betas, if you want to test and provide feedback, the release candidates RC are the versions you want to be looking for. And then from there, we're just going to check out that tag or that branch. And now the last step is to build it. And that's what this 6 is. And then we'll just confirm that it built with step 7, which is just to run Pokt version to make sure we see the correct version come back, 0.8.2. So this might take just a minute. All right, now let's run Pokt version to make sure that everything went well. And if you see the version respond back, then we're good to go. So we can continue on. And I'm going to just move back into the Pokt user's home directory to continue on. And the next thing that we're going to do is we're going to move on to part 3, which is the Pokt configuration. There's a number of configuration steps that we'll walk through, but the starting point is creating a wallet account. If you already have a Pokt account, you can export the private keys and import the private keys. That is an option, and you can check the Pokt now. If you the Pokt CLI installed with the Pokt software. So if you go Pokt --help like this, you'll see the available commands, and under the accounts command, there is an option to import it. So if you do Pokt accounts, there's an import. Where is it? Import raw, which would allow you to import the account using just the private key, or import armored. You can export from the web Pokt, or from the web wallet, the Pokt web wallet. You can export a JSON armored wallet, and you can import that using the import armored. What we're going to do is we're just going to create a new account here, and this is the other way you can go at this is create a new account, and then if you decide to stake the node later on, you can just send the 15,100 Pokt to this new account that we're creating. So this is just like creating a wallet if you were going through the web, but we're going to be doing it using the Pokt CLI, which we just installed. So the command is Pokt accounts create. And for the passphrase, you want to use a really good passphrase, and you want to use one that you'll remember, but a really strong one. So same advice that I gave earlier when I was talking about passwords for the accounts, or for the users rather. I use like a sentence. Something that's really long is going to be very, very hard to crack, but something I can remember well. Also, you might want this password to be different than your user account password. If somebody were to break into the server, hopefully that'll never happen. Probably the first thing that they would try is to get your account passphrase. They would just try to use the same account password that was cracked. So I'm going to use something different. All right, and now we have a new account that is created. This is just right now, it doesn't have any balance in it or anything because we obviously just created it. But if you use the accounts list command, or Pokt accounts, you'll see that that account now lives here on the server, or is loaded on the server, this node. But for the node to use the account, we need to set the node validator account that's going to be used. So we're going to use this Pokt account set validator command. And we're going to be using this address. This is important. The validator address needs to be on the node that is going to be running as the validator node. And then just to verify that the validator address was set, we'll use Pokt accounts get validator. And this should be the same as that account. Okay. The next thing we need to do is we need to create a file called config.json. And there is a command here that we can copy. There's actually a lot in this command. It's only showing one line, but there is a lot going on here. We'll paste it. And I'll talk through quickly after we create this file what's in there. So the file is created right now, and then this next option here is just gonna print out that file, the cat. And these are all configuration settings that the Pokt software is going to use. The seeds are the nodes that it's going to connect to initially to become part of the network. And there's some other configuration settings in here. We're not going to go through all of these, but the default settings are probably going to be fine for most cases. And there's a couple of things set in there that for this walkthrough were required. The next thing that we need to do is create a chains.json file. This is the file that provides the information about the RPC endpoints that this Pokt validator is going to use to relay to other blockchains. In this tutorial, we're just going to be relaying to the Pokt blockchain, but there I think is over 30 other blockchains right now that a Pokt node can relay to. To set those up, you would need to have an RPC endpoint for each one of those blockchains, which you would typically get by setting up a node for each one of those blockchains. And because this tutorial is about setting up a Pokt node, going into how you would set up like a Harmony node or a Polygon node is outside the scope of this. So we're just going to focus on doing this for Pokt. And there's a command that you can use that's part of the Pokt CLI, this Pokt util generate chains command, that will sort of prompt you through this. And we're going to be just adding one network identifier, which is 0001 for the Pokt blockchain. And then the RPC endpoint that we're going to use is a localhost address, because we're going to be running a Pokt full node along with the validator node on this machine that we're setting up here. So essentially we're going to be relaying to, it's going to be relaying to itself. If you were to go on and set up relays to other blockchains, you could hit yes and use the CLI command and add the URLs for each of those other chains and the IDs, which you can find in the Pokt documentation for all of the other chains. Or you could just go into like a text editor like Vim or VI or Nano and edit the chains.json file, which is located in a hidden directory. Actually, I'll show you. So this is what that command just created. And if you had other chains in here, you would basically have additional RPC endpoints, so like additional nodes here. All right, let's move on to one more configuration file that we need to create is this genesis.json file. And this we actually are just going to download from GitHub. So it's out there for us. So we're just going to cd into that hidden Pokt folder, and there's some folder in there called config subdirectory. And then in here, we'll take this next command to just get that file. And okay. And now we can see our chains.json file, the config.json that we talked about, and now the genesis.json. And that is what we need for right now. I'm going to go back into our home folder here. The next thing that we're going to do is we're going to set open file limits. Linux users have ulimits, which constrain resource usage on a user-by-user basis. The default usage limit for open file descriptors is too low for what we need, so we're going to change that. You can see the current ulimit with this ulimit-n, which is for a number of file descriptors. 1024 is the default, but we need to change that to 16384. And there is a formula for figuring this out, which I don't know off the top of my head, but is in the documentation. Okay, and then if you want to confirm that that's set, you can just run that ulimit-n again, and it'll show you now our ulimit set to 16384. This is set for this session. If the user were to log out and log back in again, it would get reset back to 1024. So what we're going to need to do is make an edit to the limits comp file, which is in Etsy security, which is this next step under permanent settings here. So we're going to go ahead and open up that file in Nano, and then this line here we're going to add to the end of it. And if you're using a username other than Pokt, you'll want to change that to whatever your username is. And we'll scroll down and just paste that in, save it, and we are good there. All right, the next step here is to download the snapshot, and the snapshot is a current version of the Pokt blockchain, and by current it's like within the past 12 hours. And the reason that you want to do this is because if you were to just start the service and try to sync from block 0, it would take days, and you probably want to finish up faster than that. And so rather than waiting days, we're going to download a snapshot. So to do that, first you move into the hidden Pokt directory, and then we're going to create a directory called data and move into that directory. And this is where the blockchain data is going to live. And then this next command is going to download an archive version of the snapshot and extract the archive as it's downloading. So we're going to copy that. Next, what I'm going to do is use a tool called Tmux, which will let me set up a separate terminal session that can run in the background. And the reason I'm doing that is because this process takes a while, and if my terminal session were to disconnect for whatever reason, if you're doing this on your laptop and you close your laptop, or your SSH session ends for whatever reason, the download will also end. So I'm going to use Tmux to run this in the background. And the way that you do that is on the Linode image, Tmux is already installed, but if not, you'd want to go sudo apt install tmux like that. And see, it's already installed here, but it may not be if you're on a different cloud provider. They may or may not have included that in their image. And then what we're going to do here is do tmux new session, and I'm going to call this snapshot. So it's tmux space new space -s, and then the name of the session is snapshot. And that's going to open like a new terminal window. And then from here, I'm in the data folder still, so I can start this, download the latest snapshot here. And now this is running in the Tmux session. And so I can get out of this by going on my keyboard, Control B and then D, and then this brings me back to my regular terminal session. And if I want to get back to the Tmux terminal session, I can do Tmux attach, and then -T for target, and then the name that we gave it, snapshot, and this will bring me back in here. And this, depending on network traffic, the network connection that the virtual private server has, and a range of other things, this can take an hour to a few hours. So you just want to let this run until it finishes up. And so I'm going to let this finish up, and we'll come back and continue on.
Okay, now the snapshot is fully downloaded and we are almost done. We're going to make a couple of changes to the data files that were downloaded. This next change here that we're going to make, step number 4, is basically just making sure that the Pokt user is the owner of all those files, which is probably the case anyway, but we'll go ahead and do that here. All right, and next we're going to set up systemd, which is a Linux service manager that is going to manage the Pokt service. So this is what's going to keep the Pokt service running in the background. And we're going to start by creating a system file, this pocket.service file here. And I'm going to move back into the user home directory. Actually, I can get out of tmux now too. I'm still in the tmux section. So I'm going to do Control B and then D. And now I'm back into the original SSH session out of tmux. So we'll get back to creating the service file here. So we're going to do that in Nano. And we're going to copy this here. And assuming that you didn't change anything with regard to like the username or the home path, this service file setup here is all we need. So we'll go ahead and exit out of here, save the changes. And now we need to restart the systemd service, this systemctl service here. And so we'll take that command. And actually, it's not restarting it. This is reloading the service files here. And next, we are going to start the Pokt service. And if all goes well here, we'll be able to view the status and see that the Pokt service is running. And that's what this next step is. And it is. It shows active, so we're good there. So now the Pokt service is fully up and running. We are getting very close to finishing up. We're just going to stop the service for a minute to configure a couple of more things. This next step here is just checking to confirm that the service is stopped. We'll go ahead and do that. You can see that now it's inactive, so we're good. And step 12, we're going to set the Pokt service to start up on boot. So if the system reboots, then the Pokt service will start, and that's what we want. So we'll go ahead and do that. And now to confirm, we can look this step number 13 just will let us confirm that it is set up to start on boot. We just are going to scroll down here and find the Pokt service and make sure that that is set to enabled. There it is. And you can see that it's enabled here. All right. And step 14, we're just starting the Pokt service back up. All right, and so now the Pokt service is running again, and there's some additional commands here in the documentation that are helpful. The restart, if the service ever seems stalled for whatever reason, this command can restart it. It can help you. You could also do stop and start like we just did. If you ever wanted to disable the service from starting on boot for whatever reason, maybe you're doing some maintenance or some updates, that is out, or that is documented here. And yeah, if you're moving your home directory or moving the location of your data file to another volume, and you want to see the mounts that systemd has visibility into, you can use this command here. And that's important because if you do have your data on a separate volume, you want to make sure that that volume is mounted before the service tries to start, otherwise it'll fail. And that is referenced here. And then there's some information here about viewing the systemd logs down here and checking for example, like this will show you the last 100 log entries, Pokt log entries, and you can see those there. And this next option here shows you how to see any errors that are happening. All right, let's continue on to our next step, which is part 4. And in this part, we're going to be setting up the proxy configuration, and we're going to start that by setting up an SSL certificate. And we'll be using Let's Encrypt, and Let's Encrypt provides free SSL certificates that are 90-day certificates, so they need to be renewed every 90 days, but we're going to use another tool, CertBot, to register the certificate and make sure that it gets re-registered every 90 days. So we're going to start by creating the certificate, and there's one command here that you can use to do that. And this is the command that I referenced earlier that depends on this host name variable here. So we set the host name early on so that now if we do, I'm going to go back into the home directory, if we do host name here, we get the full DNS name, or if I do just echo that environment variable host name, I get the full host name. And that's important because this command won't work if the host name isn't set to the full DNS host name. But it is in our case, so we're good to go. So we'll paste that in and run that, and it's going out and registering an SSL certificate. And if all goes well, we'll get a confirmation in a minute here that it was successful, and we'll be ready to move on. Okay, we got our congratulations here. That means that it was successful and we can move on. If you want, you can test it by running a dry run on the certificate renewal. That's this next command here. And this is just going to go out and try to renew the certificate, but it's going to see that the certificate doesn't need to be renewed, and it'll just confirm that it could be renewed. So this is just a test. So you see here, it says cert not due for renewal, but simulating renewal for a dry run. And that worked successfully. So we are good to move on. And next we're going to be setting up Nginx. And Nginx is a HTTP server daemon that we're going to use to proxy requests to certain URL endpoints back to the Pokt service, which is also running an HTTP service. And the first step in this process here is just confirming that we have our SSL certificate. And this is just listing the SSL certificates here, are actually the folders. And we can see in my case, pokt001.pokt.run. That's the host name that I'm using. And so you should see your host name there. And then next, we're going to be configuring a Nginx conf file, configuration file. And we're going to use pretty much what's provided here. The only changes that we're going to make are changes to the host name references. So line 27 here, we're going to change that. And then line 36 and 37 also have references in the host name. So we're going to change those to, well, you're going to change those. I'm actually not going to change those because they are what I'm using here, but you're going to want to change these to whatever the DNS name is that you're using. So again, lines 27, lines 36 and 37, want to change that to match your host name, the full host name that you're using. And then once you've done that, you can save that file and exit, and we can continue on with the Nginx configuration. And we'll do that by stopping Nginx because we're going to remove the default configuration that was set up when Nginx was first installed, and do that. And the way that Nginx works, there's like two folders that are used. There's a sites enabled, and they're both in etc Nginx, sites enabled and sites available. The sites available folder contains the configuration files, and the sites enabled folder contains symlinks back to those files. So anything that's in sites enabled is enabled, and the service is using it to serve up content. Anything that's in the sites available is only enabled if it's also got a symlink in the sites enabled. And so we created a file called Pokt in sites enabled, and we're this next step here, adding a symlink for that. All right. And next we're going to start Nginx. And we are very, very close now. We're now just going to add a few security settings. Specifically, we're going to set up a firewall to just allow access to the ports that we need. So we're going to start by enabling UFW, which is this first step here. Say yes. And next, we're going to deny access to all of the ports. And important to note on this step here that we need to do this next step before you log off with SSH, or you won't be able to log in again. And the next step 3 is enabling SSH access, which is how we're logged in right now and how we're going to need to log in later. And next, we're just going to enable port 80, which is the HTTP port, and port 443, which is the SSL port. And then port 8081, which is being used for the Pokt service. And then 26656 is used for software that Pokt uses, which is called Tendermint. And with those all enabled, we can verify using this command to see the status, just to confirm that everything is enabled. And if it is, we are good to continue on to part 5. Okay, at this point we have a fully functional node up and running, so we are effectively done, but we want to test to make sure everything's working. And if you decide that you want to stake your node to earn rewards, that would be the very last step. But first we'll test everything just to make sure that everything is working as it should be. And we'll start by just making sure that the Pokt service is running. And you can do this with this command here. And this is just using the top command to see any instances of where the Pokt user is running a service. And we can see that the service here named Pokt is running, so we're good there. And the next thing that you're going to want to check is the block height. So you want to make sure that the block height on the node is the same height as the block height of the mainnet on the public network. And you can check that by going to POKTSCAN.com, which is right here, and just refresh in my case. And then if you see the block height here, right now the current block height is 59,390. And what we want to do is make sure that our node is caught up. And so we can do that by running this command here, Pokt query height. And the block height on the node right now is 59,291. And this is 59,390. So we're still behind by roughly 100 blocks. And that might take, I don't know, shouldn't take long, 15, 20 minutes maybe to catch up. But you don't want to stake before the node is caught up. So we're going to wait for that to finish up. But while we're doing that, we'll look at a couple of other commands that you can use locally here. This network status command is helpful also for checking the status of the local node. And this is a curl request to a local endpoint that is hosted by the Pokt service. So that's why it's running here at 127.0.0.1. And You run that. There's one thing in here that is helpful. Well, there's probably more than one thing, but this catching up here, you can see that this catching up value is true. That means the node is not up to the current block height that the public blockchain is at. So it's catching up with the current blockchain. So again, we would want to let that finish up before we went on and staked the node. And then finally, for testing purposes, we want to make sure that the proxy configuration was set up correctly and that the endpoint v1 is accessible. In your case, you want to change the Pokt001 to whatever.yourdomain.com, but the same command otherwise. And this should return the version of the Pokt software that you're running. So in our case, or in the case of this video, RC0.8.2, which is correct. And yeah, so with all of that done, the very last step, if you decide you want to stake your node, and to earn rewards, you need to stake. But at this point, the node is functional and can relay. It just can't earn rewards. But it is all up and running, so you don't have to do this step unless you are interested in earning rewards. And if so, what you need, as I mentioned earlier, is you need to have at least 15,000 Pokt staked. But the recommended is 15,100, and that gives you just a little bit of extra in case there's slashing that happens if your node's offline, something like that. It's not a common occurrence anymore, but good to have a little bit extra in there. The staking process is pretty simple. You're going to want to first just make sure that the account that you're going to stake is set up correctly on the node, and you can do that with Pokt list accounts. And this was the account that we created early on. And then you want to make sure that the node validator is set to the account that is going to have the Pokt in it that you're going to stake. And these should be the same. And then you want to make sure that you've got enough Pokt to stake, and you can check that with Pokt query balance. And then you're going to use the address like this. And I don't have 15,000 in here, so I would need to transfer 15,100 Pokt into this account to stake it. And if you've, once you do have enough to stake in here, the last command you would run is this Pokt nodes stake custodial. And there's two different ways that you can stake now. You can stake custodial or non-custodial. If you're running your own node, typically you would want to use the custodial option because you control the private keys. And then the address, this address here would be replaced with the validator address that we set earlier, which is this one here. And then the denominations in this command are uPokt, which is the smallest denomination. And so you would basically have the value plus 6 zeros after it. So 15,100, and then there's 6 zeros after it. The chain IDs, this would be a list of all of the chains that your node can relay for. In our case, we just set this up for one chain, which is the Pokt blockchain. And so we would just have this 0001 for the chain ID. If you had multiple chains, if you set up to relay to multiple chains, you would list each one of the chain IDs with a comma after it. And you can find the chain IDs in the Pokt documentation. It lists all of the chains that you can relay to right now. And then the host name is going to be the DNS name that you set up when you set up your node. In our case, for this example, it was Pokt001.pokt.run. That would be your host name and your full host name. And it needs to be HTTPS. We set up the SSL certificate to support that. And then you're staking to mainnet. And then the last here is a denomination for the fee, and it's 0.01 Pokt. So that would be 10000. And that is your network fee for processing this transaction. So if you paste that in with the correct values, you would submit the staking transaction. And after submitting the staking transaction, you'll get a response back that looks something like this here, that will confirm the transaction hash, or provide the transaction hash to confirm the transaction. But it still takes a while for the staking to go through. So it could be maybe 30 minutes, 45 minutes, something like that before the staking is done. But once you've completed that, you can check to make sure that the node is live with this Pokt query node command. So like this, and then you would follow that with the address of the node. And in this case, it's not staked, so we're going to get an error back. But if it were staked, you would see a JSON response with details about the node and how much was staked. And that would confirm that the node is up and live and ready to gain rewards. And that is it. If you made it to this point, congratulations, your node is now up and running. Hopefully this video was helpful. If you have any questions or comments, the best place to go would be to the Pokt Discord server, the official Pokt Discord server. And there's a channel in there called the Node Runners channel. And that would be the place to go and ask questions. You can find me in there. I'm Steve at Dabbelab if you want to direct those questions to me, but it's a great community. And so really anybody in that channel, you just post it generally and somebody will very likely respond and help you out. Thanks so much for watching, and happy node running.